Most people think wars are won by guns, bombs, and numbers. They imagine loud battles and powerful weapons. Very few imagine that trash could change the outcome of a fight. Yet deep in the Pacific jungle, an empty soup can become one of the most dangerous tools ever used by a Marine. It was not special. It was not rare. It was not even meant to be used. But in the right hands, it broke a Japanese battalion in less than 5 days. This did not happen because of luck. It did not happen because one man was a better shot than everyone else. It happened because one Marine understood something most soldiers never stop to think about. Curiosity can be deadlier than fear. The story begins long before the jungle. It begins in the mountains of Montana, where Thomas Michael Callahan grew up learning lessons that no military school could teach. The Bitterroot Mountains were quiet, unforgiving places. Mistakes were punished without mercy. Wind changed without warning. Distance lied to the eye. As a boy, Callahan learned that rushing a shot meant failure. He learned to wait. He learned to observe. He learned that nature never forgives impatience. If he missed a shot while hunting, there was no second chance. The animal was gone. The lesson stayed. These lessons shaped him quietly. No one noticed. No one praised him, but they settled deep into how he thought. When Callahan joined the Marines after Pearl Harbor, he looked like thousands of other young men. He carried no special rank, no reputation, no obvious talent, but on the rifle range, instructors noticed something unsettling. He did not shoot when others did. While most Marines fired as soon as the sights aligned, Callahan waited. He watched the grass move. He studied heat in the air. He measured how the target swayed in the wind. Only when everything agreed did he squeeze the trigger. To instructors, it looked slow. To Callahan, it felt correct. He scored near the top of his class not because he fired often, but because he refused to fire badly. That mindset followed him everywhere. Within days, he was sent to Scout Sniper School. Many later believed this school made him dangerous. That idea was wrong. The school did not give him instincts. It gave him words for instincts he already had. One instructor mattered more than the rest. Gunnery Sergeant William Henderson. Henderson taught sniper psychology, not just shooting. On the first day, he said something Callahan never forgot. The shot is the end of the mission, not the start. Then he explained something even more important. A sniper who searches for targets reacts to the enemy. A sniper who creates targets controls the enemy. That difference separates shooters from hunters. Most students struggled with that idea. Callahan did not. He understood it immediately. This was how he hunted animals as a boy. He never chased, he waited. He forced movement. He shaped behavior. During field exercises, the difference became clear. Other students tried to get closer. Callahan tried to disappear. He moved so slowly that even instructors scanning with binoculars could not find him. In the final test, observers searched for hours. They found signs of movement everywhere except where Callahan lay. After 9 hours, he stood up calmly and said he had been ready to shoot for a long time. After graduation, Henderson spoke to him privately. He told Callahan he thought like a hunter. Then he added a warning: animals flee danger. Soldiers investigate it. That sentence mattered more than any marksmanship lesson. It would later become the hinge of everything that followed. When Callahan arrived on the island of Bougainville in late 1943, he expected violence. He expected hardship. He expected death. What he did not expect was the moment that would define his entire war. For days, he operated like any Marine: patrols, observation, long hours watching shadows move in thick jungle. Japanese snipers were skilled. They knew the terrain. They rarely fired twice from the same place. They controlled the trees. Then on November 8, 1943, everything changed. Callahan and his spotter, Corporal James Rivera, were observing a patch of brush. It did not look special. It did not feel dangerous. Rivera raised his binoculars for a few seconds. That was enough. A single shot cut through the air. Clean. Precise, silent until impact. Rivera collapsed without a sound. Callahan did not move. He did not panic. He did not return fire. He did not call for help. He understood immediately what had happened. A sniper that skilled does not fire twice. A sniper that disciplined does not expose himself. Rivera had not died by chance. He had been studied. Callahan lay still for 30 minutes, barely breathing. He let the jungle settle. He replayed every detail in his mind. The angle, the movement, the position of the brush. Slowly the geometry formed. He knew the kind of enemy he faced. Patient, methodical, smart. Standard counter-sniper tactics would fail. Callahan carried Rivera's body back himself. Then he went to his commanding officer. He did not ask for artillery. He did not ask for reinforcements. He asked for permission to think beyond doctrine. He said something officers rarely heard: "We cannot outshoot him, we must outthink him." That night, alone in a shallow foxhole, Callahan searched for a blind spot. He did not think about rifles. He thought about behavior. About Henderson's words, animals run, soldiers investigate. While eating his rations, he placed an empty soup can beside him. As the sun dropped, light struck the metal rim and flashed across the jungle floor. Callahan froze. He turned the can slightly. The light moved. Again, it was not a signal, not a weapon, just light, but light that meant something. In that moment, he understood the paradox that would define the next 5 days. If he could not make the enemy afraid, he would make them curious. And curiosity, he knew, could be fatal. The idea did not feel clever when it first appeared in Callahan's mind. It felt dangerous. Simple ideas often are. That night, the empty soup can sat beside him in the dirt, catching faint light as the sky darkened. Callahan did not sleep much. His thoughts kept circling one question: why do trained soldiers expose themselves? Fear alone does not explain it. Discipline alone does not stop it. There is a moment deep inside the human mind when uncertainty becomes worse than danger. In that moment, people lean forward instead of staying hidden. Callahan had seen it his entire life. He had watched hunters stand up to look when something felt wrong. He had seen animals freeze, then move when curiosity replaced instinct. Now he realized soldiers were no different. The next morning, Callahan did not report to a firing position. He went somewhere else, a place most men ignored, the trash area. While others prepared weapons and patrol routes, Callahan quietly gathered discarded ration cans, bent wire, broken stakes, and scraps of string. Marines nearby laughed and shook their heads. They thought he was bored or cleaning up. He did not explain himself. He selected 5 soup cans with intact metal rims, not because they were perfect, but because they behaved the same way in the sun. Consistency mattered more than shine. Callahan understood something critical. If a stimulus changes behavior, it must act predictably. Random tricks fail quickly, controlled ones last. Before dawn on November 9, he moved several hundred yards behind friendly lines to a small clearing that overlooked Japanese movement routes. He chose the spot carefully. It was far enough to avoid suspicion, close enough to observe patterns. He planted the cans on thin sticks at slight angles. Each angle was calculated, not dramatic, just enough to catch sunlight briefly. He tied simple strings to some, allowing tiny adjustments from a distance. The goal was not communication, the goal was ambiguity. At first light, the jungle woke slowly. Birds moved, mist lifted. Then the sun broke through the canopy. At 6:15 a.m., one soup can flashed, just for a moment, then nothing. 30 seconds later, a second can caught the light, then silence again. To an untrained eye, it meant nothing. To a trained observer, it suggested intent. Callahan lay prone far from the cans. He was not watching the reflections. He was watching the Japanese. 20 minutes passed, nothing happened. Callahan waited. He knew curiosity took time. Discipline had to crack first. Then he saw movement. A Japanese soldier eased forward from cover, not rushing, not careless. The posture said everything. This man was not attacking, he was trying to understand. The soldier raised binoculars. Callahan fired once. The body collapsed backward into the brush. No drama, no sound beyond the shot itself. Almost immediately, mortars slammed into the clearing where the cans stood. Shells hit with precision and anger. The Japanese believed the flashes marked a threat. But Callahan was already gone. That single test taught him 3 things. First, Japanese doctrine demanded investigation of anomalies. Second, curiosity overrode caution in about 20 minutes. Third, something as simple as reflected light could drive lethal decisions. That night, Callahan refined his system. He punched holes into some cans to soften the flash. He smeared mud on others to dull the reflection. He adjusted angles so certain cans flashed only at specific times. This was no longer improvisation. It was engineering. When he reported his findings, officers listened closely. They did not ask if the idea was strange. They asked how effective it could be. Callahan answered honestly. 20 to 30 in a week, he said, if they react like trained observers always do. The response was immediate. He was given 5 days. A security team, full freedom of movement. His objective was not to kill snipers. It was to break the enemy's ability to observe the battlefield. That distinction mattered more than anyone realized. The operation began on November 10. Callahan expanded the system. 6 cans now stood in a wide arc. Each reflected light at slightly different moments. Not rhythmic, not random, just enough structure to suggest communication. As the sun rose, the jungle blinked. One long flash, one short flash, then silence. 2 Japanese soldiers emerged from a concealed bunker. They pointed, one raised binoculars. Callahan fired twice. By sunset, he had 9 confirmed kills. None were accidental, none were discovered targets. Everyone had been created. The cans did not reveal the enemy. They shaped enemy behavior. By day 2, Callahan changed focus. He was no longer targeting ordinary soldiers. He was hunting the sniper who had killed Rivera. That man was different. Reports pointed to a single tree far out in the jungle. Shots came from there, but never twice in the same way. No flashes, no sound cues, a professional. Callahan knew that Sniper would not chase random reflections, so he changed the bait. He built a fake command post. Marines moved radios and maps in visible patterns. Soup cans nearby flashed in sequences that resembled real signals. To the Japanese sniper, this looked valuable. Callahan positioned himself at an angle no one expected. He watched the tree line patiently. 90 minutes passed. Then the foliage shifted, not wind, not chance. A rifle barrel appeared. Callahan fired once. The sniper fell through the branches. That kill was not about accuracy, it was about forcing a decision. By November 11, something strange began to happen. Japanese soldiers did not respond immediately to flashes anymore. Fear began to slow curiosity. At first, this looked like progress for them. It was not. Fear changed their behavior, and changed behavior became predictable. Callahan escalated. He added more cans, wider spacing, more complex sequences. The flashes now resembled patrol coordination and defensive repositioning. Uncertainty replaced confidence. 16 more soldiers died on day 3, not because they were careless, because officers needed information, and information required exposure. On November 13, the system reached its peak. The jungle blinked everywhere. Japanese commanders believed an assault was coming. They repositioned units, they exposed officers, they moved across open ground. Callahan waited. 27 kills that day. Captured diaries later told the story better than numbers ever could. Light appears from nowhere. Men investigate and do not return. I no longer trust my eyes. By day 4, the enemy was blind, and Callahan was not finished. By the start of the 4th day, the battlefield had changed, even though the terrain looked the same. Trees still stood. Trenches were still dug. Weapons were still loaded, but something invisible had broken: trust. The Japanese soldiers no longer trusted what they saw. That was far worse than fear. Fear can be managed. It can be trained around. Doubt cannot. Callahan felt the shift before anyone told him. He sensed it in the delays. In the way movement slowed. In the way patrols hesitated at the edge of cover. The soupcans still flashed, but the responses came later now. Slower, careful, heavy. The enemy was thinking too hard. That was exactly where Callahan wanted them. On the morning of November 12, the sun rose weak behind thin cloud cover. The light was softer, less reliable. For most men, that would have been a problem. For Callahan, it was an opportunity. He adjusted the system. Fewer flashes. Longer gaps. When something did appear, it lasted just long enough to feel deliberate. The Japanese response followed a new pattern. Instead of single soldiers, small groups moved out. They hugged cover. They paused often. Officers stayed back, but not far enough. Callahan watched them from a position no one suspected. He did not rush shots. He did not fire at the first man who appeared. He waited for leadership. A corporal stepped forward to signal. One shot, the group froze, then pulled back. Callahan did not fire again. He wanted uncertainty to spread. That afternoon, Japanese commanders issued new orders. Patrols were told to investigate flashes only with cover. Observers were warned to move cautiously. No one was to expose themselves alone. On paper, it was a smart adjustment. In reality, it made everything worse, because caution creates patterns. Groups move slower, they cluster, they rely on rank. Officers step forward to confirm what soldiers hesitate to face. Callahan understood that hierarchy is visibility. He placed new cans farther apart, not closer. He wanted responses to stretch, to force decisions across distance. By midday, Japanese movement became chaotic. One unit advanced. Another held back. Signals crossed. Officers shouted. Every correction required exposure. Callahan punished each one. By evening, the kill count rose again. But numbers were no longer the point. The enemy's decision loop was collapsing. That night, clouds rolled in thicker than expected. The moon disappeared. No stars. No sunlight meant no reflections. Any other sniper would have stopped. Callahan did not, because the cans were never the weapon. Curiosity was. Before dawn on November 13, Callahan returned to the trash pile. This time he selected empty ammunition tins and canteens. He filled them with pebbles. Small stones, anything that could make sound. He hung them from branches using thin wire and string, not loose, controlled. Each could be shaken slightly from a distance. The sounds were soft, almost harmless. A faint rattle, a short tap. A clink that suggested equipment shifting. Not enough to signal danger, enough to demand attention. By mid-morning, the jungle whispered. Japanese soldiers reacted the same way they had to the light, slowly at first. Then with increasing urgency. One man leaned out to listen. Callahan fired. Another stepped forward to confirm. Another shot. Officers began shouting orders. Patrols moved. Someone dropped equipment. A can rattled again. Equipment. A can rattled again. The trap reset itself. By noon, 9 more soldiers were dead. The weather had taken away the light. Callahan replaced it with sound. By now, Japanese officers were desperate. They banned investigation of flashes and noises. then reversed the order when information dried up. They pulled observers back, then sent officers forward instead. The contradiction crushed discipline. Captured notes later revealed the truth. We are punished whether we act or wait. Orders require observation. But observation kills. An army cannot function like that. On November 14, the system reached a breaking point. Callahan used everything at once: muted flashes, soft rattles, fake movement. False signals. The battlefield became unreadable. Japanese units repositioned constantly. Officers exposed themselves to restore order. Messengers ran between positions. Callahan did not chase targets. He let them come to him. 27 confirmed kills that day, not from aggression, from paralysis. By the evening of November 14, the Japanese battalion in that sector had almost no reliable observation. Patrols went missing. Posts fell silent. Reports contradicted each other. They were not defeated by force. They were defeated by confusion. On the morning of November 15, heavy cloud cover settled in again. Rain followed. The jungle darkened. Sound carried poorly. Visibility dropped. The Soupkin system should have ended. Instead, Callahan ended it himself. At 3:45 p.m., a Japanese officer stepped into the open during a moment of chaos. He held a map. He was trying to make sense of conflicting reports. Callahan fired once. That shot broke what little order remained. At 4:00 p.m., Callahan withdrew. 5 days were over. The final count was staggering. 112 confirmed kills. Nearly 100 independently verified. An entire intelligence network collapsed. An entire sector frozen. And it had been done with garbage. When Callahan returned to friendly lines, he did not celebrate. He did not speak much at all. His hands shook slightly. His eyes looked distant. 5 days of perfect patience leave marks. Medical officers called it exhaustion. Quiet exhaustion, the kind that settles after the noise stops. Callahan rested, he ate, he slept, but his mind did not slow. It replayed every moment, every decision, every man who stepped forward because curiosity demanded it. He did not question the mission. He questioned the cost. Weeks later, analysts studied captured Japanese logs. The pattern was unmistakable. Unidentified stimuli observed, recon ordered, recon eliminated, follow-up restricted. Information gap expands. Modern doctrine would later call this a sensor collapse. Callahan had discovered it without a name because he had not thought like a soldier, he had thought like a hunter. And that understanding would soon change his life again. When the firing finally stopped, the jungle did not return to normal. It never does. Silence after violence feels heavy, as if the air itself is holding its breath. Callahan noticed it immediately. Birds were slow to return. Insects stayed hidden longer than usual. Even the wind felt cautious. The battlefield remembered. Callahan spent the next 2 weeks away from the line. Official reports called it recovery time. The truth was simpler. His mind needed space to slow down. 5 days of perfect control had demanded a cost that no chart could measure. He ate when told. He slept when exhaustion won. He spoke only when asked. Medical officers wrote notes about fatigue and stress. They used gentle language: combat exhaustion, mental strain, nothing dramatic, nothing loud. The quiet kind worried them more. Callahan did not argue. At night, memories replayed without permission. The flashes, the pauses, the way men leaned forward when they should have stayed hidden. He remembered faces only briefly. What stayed longer were the moments before each shot. The instant when curiosity crossed the line into exposure. He understood something deeply now. He had not defeated men. He had defeated a system. That realization was heavier than pride. Word of the operation moved upward through command channels. Not loudly, not publicly. It traveled in folders, briefings, and quiet conversations between officers who understood its meaning. The kill count impressed them. The method unsettled them. Because if a single sergeant could dismantle a battalion's intelligence system with scrap metal and patience, then doctrine itself had blind spots. And blind spots are dangerous. By late November 1943, Callahan received new orders. They surprised him. He was not being sent back to the line. He was being reassigned. Camp Pendleton, instructor duty. At first, Callahan thought it was a mistake. He was young, he was effective, the war was far from over. Snipers were needed everywhere, but the Marine Corps had reached a different conclusion. They did not need his rifle anymore. They needed his thinking. Callahan did not argue. He had never chased medals or recognition. If his role was changing, he accepted it. Still, the transition felt strange. One day he was lying in mud shaping enemy decisions. The next, he was standing in front of a chalkboard. The classroom smelled of dust and oil. Young Marines sat in rows, clean uniforms, sharp faces. Many believed sniper work was about shooting skill alone. Callahan erased the diagram already drawn on the board. Then he wrote a single sentence: "The shot is the last step." The room went quiet. He did not start with wind calls or breathing techniques. He started with questions. Why does an enemy move? What does he fear? What can he not ignore? The recruits shifted uncomfortably. This was not what they expected. Callahan explained the truth slowly. A sniper who hunts targets reacts. A sniper who creates targets controls. He spoke about Bougainville, but not in detail. No numbers, no praise, no drama. He spoke about behavior. He explained how curiosity overrides discipline, how uncertainty forces action, how confusion spreads faster than fear. Most importantly, he taught them this. A sniper does not win by being invisible. He wins by making the enemy see the wrong thing. The idea unsettled many students. It challenged what they thought warfare was. Callahan welcomed the discomfort. Over the next months, he trained hundreds of snipers. His methods spread quietly. False signals, dummy positions, controlled noise, deliberate ambiguity, doctrine shifted, not overnight but steadily. Callahan never glorified the soup cans. He rarely mentioned them at all. He focused on the principle behind them. Perception is terrain. If you control perception, you control movement. If you control movement, you control outcomes. Students remembered one phrase more than any other. Creativity keeps you alive, routine gets you killed. By early 1944, the Marine Corps began integrating these ideas formally. Counter-sniper doctrine changed. Observation was no longer treated as a simple task. It became a risk. The enemy learned too. Captured Japanese manuals from later in the war included new warnings. Do not investigate unexplained light. Avoid exposure when verifying signals. Assume deception. Those lines had not existed before Bougainville. They existed because of it. Callahan did not see the manuals until much later. When he did, he felt no satisfaction. Only confirmation. The enemy had adapted. That meant the idea had worked. After the war, Callahan returned home to Montana. He did not wear his service lightly. He did not tell stories. He did not correct people who assumed he had been a regular infantryman. He became a teacher. Science classes, problem-solving workshops, coaching students to think before acting. Those who knew him well noticed patterns. He asked questions instead of giving answers. He encouraged curiosity but warned about rushing conclusions. Students never guessed that their calm teacher had once turned curiosity into a weapon. Callahan lived quietly, married, taught, helped others think more clearly. When he passed away in 2003, his obituary was simple. Marine, teacher, community member. Only one line hinted at the truth. Served as a sniper instructor during World War II. The Soupkins eventually found their way into a museum. Rusted, dented, unremarkable. Visitors walked past them without slowing down. They did not see what Callahan had seen, not metal, possibility. Because the real weapon had never been the cans, it had been imagination. And imagination leaves no shell casings behind. As time passed, the story of Bougainville began to change shape. Not because the facts were altered, but because people tried to simplify them. Humans prefer clean stories, clear heroes, obvious weapons. The Soupkin story became a clever trick in casual retellings. A strange moment. A lucky idea. Callahan knew that version was wrong. Luck fades quickly. What happened on Bougainville did not. In quiet offices far from the jungle, officers studied reports line by line. They did not focus on the kill numbers for long. Numbers impress, but they do not teach. What held their attention was the pattern. Every engagement followed the same arc. Stimulus appears, enemy investigates, enemy exposed, enemy removed, reaction changes, system weakens. It was repeatable. That made it dangerous. One intelligence officer wrote a single sentence in the margin of the report. This is not marksmanship, this is behavioral control. That sentence mattered, because once the Marine Corps understood that, the operation stopped being an anomaly. It became a lesson. Callahan's training methods were quietly expanded. New sniper teams were encouraged to think beyond rifles. They practiced deception drills. They learned how to create false certainty and manufactured urgency. The idea spread slowly but deeply. Meanwhile, Callahan himself struggled with something harder to explain: stillness. In Montana, the world felt too quiet at first. The mountains were familiar, but the silence was different. It did not demand attention. It did not punish mistakes. It simply existed. Callahan hunted again, but not the way he used to. He took fewer shots. He watched longer. Sometimes he did not fire at all. People around him thought age had softened him. They were wrong. He had learned something most never do. Control is not about action. It is about restraint. That lesson had cost him more than anyone could see. Years later, when former students visited him, they asked the same question in different ways. Did it bother you? Callahan never answered quickly. He always paused. Then he said the same thing. It bothered me that it worked so well. That answer confused people. He explained when pressed. Killing in war is expected. Shaping behavior is permanent. When you remove a man, the fight changes for a moment. When you remove trust, the fight changes forever. That understanding stayed with him. As military doctrine evolved through the decades, new terms appeared: information dominance, psychological operations, deception warfare, sensor denial. Callahan recognized the ideas immediately. They were familiar, the tools had changed. Radios replaced light, signals replaced sound, screens replaced sightlines, but the principle was identical. Force the enemy to respond to something false. Exploit the response. Modern warfare called it sophisticated. Callahan called it human, because the human mind had not changed. People still investigate uncertainty. People still fear being wrong more than being hurt. People still expose themselves to confirm what they do not understand. That truth made Bougainville timeless. Historians eventually began revisiting the operation. Not as a footnote but as a case study. Some questioned the numbers, others debated the ethics. A few dismissed it as exaggerated. Callahan never joined those discussions. He had no interest in defending the story. The results spoke for themselves. Japanese field manuals written after Bougainville included warnings that did not exist before. New training emphasized ignoring unexplained signals. Officers were instructed to resist curiosity. That change alone proved everything. Armies do not rewrite doctrine because of myths, they rewrite it because of losses. Callahan understood that better than anyone. In his later years, he was asked to speak once at a small military seminar. The audience expected a dramatic story, a clever trick, a heroic tale. He disappointed them. He spoke quietly. He told them the soup cans were irrelevant. He told them the rifle was secondary. Then he said something that stayed with everyone in the room. If the enemy understands what you are doing, you are already late. He explained that the true goal was never deception itself. It was tempo. If you force the enemy to react, you control time. If you control time, you control decisions. Decisions, not bullets, decide outcomes. That idea unsettled younger officers. Callahan smiled gently. It had unsettled him too once. When he died, the Marine Corps archived his reports again. They were no longer secret. Scholars read them with fresh eyes. New wars gave old ideas new relevance. One analyst wrote a summary decades later. Callahan did not defeat a battalion, he defeated certainty. That line captured everything. The soupkins became symbols, not tools, symbols of how small ideas can carry large weight. Symbols of how thinking differently matters more than thinking harder. Visitors still walk past those cans in the museum. They still look ordinary. That is the point. Because the most dangerous ideas in war never look dangerous at first. They look simple, they look harmless, they look like trash, until someone understands how to use them. Callahan understood, and that understanding shaped far more than 5 days in a jungle. It shaped how wars would be fought when firepower alone was not enough. Yet the final lesson of Bougainville was not tactical, it was personal. Callahan never confused survival with glory. He never mistook effectiveness for pride. He carried the weight of his decisions quietly, knowing that every innovation in war saves some lives and ends others. That balance never left him. In his final years, when asked what he was most proud of, he did not mention Bougainville. He mentioned teaching. Thinking, he said, keeps people alive longer than bravery. That belief defined him more than any operation ever could. And it is the reason the story does not truly end with soup cans, rifles, or numbers. It ends with a question. What unseen habits guide your choices? Because once someone learns how to shape those habits, the battlefield changes forever. Long after the war ended, the lessons from Bougainville continued to surface in places Callahan never visited. They appeared quietly without his name attached. New training manuals, new field exercises, new ways of thinking that felt familiar even when described with modern language. Callahan watched it all from a distance. He did not follow military journals closely, but former students did. They visited him when they could. Some were officers now, some were instructors themselves. They spoke carefully, knowing he disliked praise. They told him how his ideas had traveled. False signals were now standard training. Units practiced misleading observation instead of just hiding. Counter-sniper doctrine focused on controlling what the enemy noticed, not simply avoiding detection. Not simply avoiding detection. Callahan listened, he nodded, he asked questions, he never said, "I told you so." Because he had never believed the idea belonged to him. To Callahan, Bougainville was not genius. It was necessity. When doctrine fails, thinking must replace it. That truth existed long before he stepped into the jungle. As years passed, the world changed. New wars began, new technology filled the sky and airwaves, satellites replaced observers. Screens replaced binoculars, but the problem stayed the same. Humans still had to interpret information, and interpretation still created weakness. Callahan once explained this to a young officer who asked how soup cans could matter in a modern battlefield. "The cans don't matter," Callahan said. "What matters is the pause before a decision." He explained that every system has a moment where it must choose. That moment is always human, even when machines are involved. Someone must trust the signal, someone must confirm the data, someone must decide to act. That is where influence lives. The officer asked if Callahan thought deception would always work. Callahan shook his head. No, he said, only once. What? That answer surprised him. Callahan explained. A trick only works the first time. After that, the enemy adapts. But the principle remains. If you can force adaptation, you force friction. Friction slows action. Slow action creates opportunity. Opportunity saves lives. That was his measure of success. Callahan did not romanticize the operation. He did not describe it as clever. He described it as heavy. 5 days of waiting. 5 days of control. 5 days of watching men make fatal choices. He once admitted something few expected. The hardest part, he said, was not pulling the trigger. It was knowing when not to. That restraint defined everything. As time softened memories, the story of Bougainville continued to drift toward legend. Numbers grew vague, details blurred. The soup became the headline. Callahan disliked that. He understood why it happened. People prefer objects to ideas. Objects are easy to display. Ideas demand thought. But he worried the wrong lesson would be learned. If people copied the trick instead of the thinking, they would fail. He warned instructors about this often. Never repeat tactics, he said, repeat reasoning. That warning became part of his quiet legacy. In later years, when asked to summarize Bougainville in one sentence, Callahan offered a simple answer. I stopped trying to hide and started trying to mislead. That shift changed everything. Hiding reacts to threat, misleading creates threat. One is defensive, the other is decisive. Callahan believed modern warfare would increasingly favor the second. He was right. Decades later, analysts described similar principles using new words: information dominance, cognitive warfare, perception management. Callahan read those phrases once. He laughed softly. Same thing, he said, different uniforms. As he aged, Callahan became more reflective, not regretful, reflective. He spoke openly about the mental cost of control, about the quiet exhaustion that follows sustained precision, about how manipulating behavior weighs differently than reacting to danger. He believed soldiers deserved honesty about that cost. Thinking doesn't make war easier, he said. It makes it quieter, and quiet stays with you. That honesty mattered, because Bougainville was not a story of excitement. It was a story of patience stretched to its limit. 5 days where nothing could be rushed. 5 days where mistakes meant death. 5 days where control had to be perfect. That level of discipline leaves marks. Callahan never claimed moral certainty. He did not frame the operation as righteous or clever. He framed it as required. The enemy was skilled. Traditional methods failed. Something had to change. He changed it. And then he walked away. That last part is often overlooked. Callahan did not build a career on Bougainville. He did not chase recognition. He did not seek promotion or command. He returned to teaching. That choice says more than any report, because teaching spreads ideas farther than war ever can. Through his students, Callahan's thinking reached conflicts he never saw. Through them, his ideas saved people he would never meet. That was enough. In his final interview given years before his death, Callahan was asked what he wanted remembered. He thought for a long time, then he said something unexpected. I want people to remember that the enemy is human. The interviewer waited. Callahan continued. Machines don't get curious, people do. Machines don't doubt, people do. If you forget that, you lose. That statement carried the entire lesson of Bougainville. Not soup cans, not rifles, not numbers, human behavior. When Callahan passed away, a former student placed a small note beside his photograph. It contained a single line from one of his lectures. The battlefield is built in the mind first. That line outlived him, and it brings the story to its final movement, because the real end of Bougainville was not the withdrawal. It was what followed, how one quiet idea reshaped doctrine, how imagination became a weapon, and how thinking differently proved more powerful than force. By the time Callahan's ideas had fully spread through training programs, few people remembered where they began. That was normal. Military thinking often absorbs lessons and forgets their origins. What matters is not who started an idea, but whether it survives contact with reality. Callahan's ideas did. They survived because they were simple. Not easy, simple. They did not depend on special equipment. They did not require rare talent. They required only one thing that doctrine often discourages: independent thought. As new generations of Marines trained, instructors noticed a quiet change. Snipers no longer asked only how to shoot better. They asked how to make the enemy move, how to force decisions, how to shape reactions. Those questions mattered because they shifted the role of the sniper from hunter to architect. An architect does not chase outcomes. He designs conditions where outcomes become inevitable. That was Callahan's true contribution. In later conflicts, similar principles appeared under different names. Dummy radio traffic, false heat signatures, decoy movements, artificial patterns meant to pull enemy attention away from reality. Technology advanced. Screens replaced jungle, signals replaced light, but the logic stayed the same. Make the enemy look where you are not, make him move when he should wait, make him wait when he should move. Confusion does the rest. Callahan once explained this using a simple example to students. If I make you look left, he said, I don't have to attack from the right, you'll do something wrong on your own. That idea unsettled some students. It felt unfair. In direct, Callahan reminded them that war was not about fairness, it was about survival. As the decades passed, Bougainville faded from popular memory. It never fit the heroic mold. There were no dramatic charges, no final stand. No clear visual climax. Just waiting, thinking, control. Those elements do not translate well into legend, but among professionals the story never disappeared. It became a quiet reference point. A reminder that dominance does not always come from power. Sometimes it comes from understanding. One analyst summarized it in a training document many years later. The most dangerous weapon on the battlefield is certainty. Remove it. That sentence could have been written by Callahan himself. Yet Callahan never claimed certainty. That is what made him effective. He questioned assumptions, he tested ideas, he observed reactions. When something failed, he adjusted. That mindset saved lives, not because it was clever, because it was honest. Callahan did not believe enemies were stupid. He believed they were human. That distinction mattered. Underestimating the enemy leads to arrogance. Understanding the enemy leads to control. He taught his students never to mock opponents. Mockery makes you lazy, he said. Respect makes you careful. That respect shaped everything he did. In his later years, Callahan rarely spoke about Bougainville unless asked directly. When he did, he corrected one misconception every time. People assumed the Japanese were careless. They weren't, he said. They were disciplined. That's why it worked. Discipline creates predictability. Predictability creates leverage. That truth applied far beyond warfare. Callahan used it in teaching, in coaching, in life. He encouraged students to question routines, to notice habits, to ask why things were done a certain way. Rules exist for a reason, he said, but reasons change. That philosophy came directly from the jungle. When Callahan looked back on his life, he did not divide it into war and peace. He saw a single line: learning how systems behave, learning how people behave inside systems. Bougainville was simply the moment those lessons collided, and yet, for all its impact, the operation remained strangely quiet in official histories. Overshadowed by larger battles, buried beneath statistics and timelines. Callahan did not mind. He never wanted fame. He wanted understanding, because understanding spreads farther than stories. Near the end of his life, Callahan was asked one final question by a former student. If you could change one thing about how people remember Bougainville, what would it be? Callahan did not answer right away. He looked out at the mountains, he listened to the wind, then he spoke. I'd want them to stop asking what the trick was, he said, and start asking why it worked. That distinction mattered, because the trick belonged to one moment. The reason belonged to all moments. If people understood that, Bougainville would never truly be forgotten, because it would keep happening, not with soup cans, not with sunlight, but with ideas. Ideas that turn certainty into doubt. Ideas that turn observation into risk. Ideas that turn discipline against itself. That is how wars change, quietly. Callahan's life ended far from the jungle. No gunfire, no alarms, just calm. Yet the echo of those 5 days remained. Not in museums, not in numbers, but in every doctrine that teaches soldiers to think before they act. And that brings the story to its final part. Because Bougainville did not end when Callahan walked off the line. It ended when the world slowly realized what had actually happened. The true ending of the Bougainville story did not come with gunfire, reports, or medals. It came quietly, spread across years, carried forward by people who never met Thomas Michael Callahan and never saw a jungle flash in the sun. It ended when the idea outlived the man. After Callahan's death, his name slowly faded from memory outside professional circles. That was expected. Wars remember generals more easily than sergeants. They remember battles more easily than ideas. But the idea refused to disappear. It showed up wherever soldiers faced uncertainty. It appeared whenever observation became dangerous, whenever information could not be trusted, whenever the enemy reacted not to reality but to what they believed they saw. Modern officers described it in new ways. They spoke of decision loops, they spoke of cognitive overload, they spoke of perception management, different words. Same truth: force the enemy to think wrong and he defeats himself. That was the final lesson of Bougainville, not the soup cans, not the kill count, not the 5 days, the shift in how war was understood. Before Bougainville, sniping was mostly about concealment and accuracy. After Bougainville, it began to include manipulation and influence. The battlefield was no longer just physical space. It was mental space. Callahan had proven that if you controlled that space, terrain mattered less. This understanding reshaped doctrine quietly, training manuals evolved, exercises changed. Young snipers were taught not just how to hide, but how to mislead. And not just snipers. Recon units, intelligence teams, electronic warfare specialists, all absorbed the same principle: create a false picture, wait for the response, exploit it. That cycle became foundational. Years later, historians looking back at the Pacific Campaign struggled to place Bougainville properly. It did not fit traditional categories. It was not a major offensive. It was not a decisive battle in terms of territory. But it was decisive in another way. It removed certainty. The Japanese battalion did not lose because it lacked courage or discipline. It lost because its understanding of the battlefield collapsed. Its leaders could not trust what they saw. Its soldiers could not trust what they heard. Once that trust was gone, action became impossible. That is why the operation mattered, because armies do not fail when they lose men. They fail when they lose clarity. Callahan never framed it that way. He did not use academic language, he spoke plainly. If they don't know what's real, he once said, they can't fight right. That simple sentence captured everything. In the decades after the war, technology advanced at a pace Callahan never imagined. Sensors replaced eyes, screens replaced hills, signals replaced sound and light. Some believed this made deception less relevant. They were wrong. It made it more important, because the more information systems grow, the more they rely on interpretation. And interpretation is always human, even when machines are involved. Someone must decide what matters. Someone must decide what to ignore. Someone must decide when to act. That decision point is vulnerability. Callahan's operation showed how easily that vulnerability could be shaped, not with force, with suggestion. That is why the story endured among professionals. Not because it was dramatic, because it was true. The quietest ideas often last the longest. In his personal life, Callahan never acted like a man who had changed warfare. He lived modestly, he taught, he helped others learn how to think clearly. When asked late in life if he missed the Corps, he answered honestly. I miss the problem solving, he said, not the killing. That answer revealed everything. To Callahan, war had never been about destruction. It had been about survival under impossible conditions. And survival, he believed, depended on thinking differently when old answers failed. That belief shaped his entire life. Students who passed through his classroom remembered him not as a veteran but as a patient teacher. Someone who asked questions instead of giving solutions. Someone who encouraged doubt, not certainty. Many of them later realized why. Certainty is comforting, certainty is also dangerous. Callahan had seen what certainty did in the jungle. It killed men, so he taught people to question it. That may be his greatest legacy, not the soup cans behind glass. Not the rifle in the museum, but the mindset he passed on. Today, when military students study deception, they often begin with advanced tools. Electronic spoofing, cyber manipulation, false signatures. Few realize the foundation was laid with scrap metal and patience. Few realize that one of the most effective operations in the Pacific War began with a question, not a weapon. What will the enemy feel forced to investigate? That question still matters, because every battlefield, no matter how advanced, is ultimately shaped by human reactions. Fear, curiosity, doubt. Callahan understood that early. And for 5 days on Bougainville, he turned that understanding into decisive advantage. Not because he was cruel, but because he was precise. Precision in thinking is rarer than precision in shooting. That is why his story matters. Not as a legend, not as a trick, but as a reminder. Wars are not won only by strength. They are won by perspective, the side that adapts faster, the side that thinks deeper, the side that sees the battlefield not as land but as behavior. That side gains the upper hand. When visitors walk past those rusted soup cans today, most do not stop. They look ordinary, worthless, trash. That is fitting, because the most powerful ideas rarely announce themselves. They wait quietly until someone is brave enough to ask a different question. Thomas Michael Callahan asked that question, and in doing so, he changed how wars are fought, even if most people never learned his name. That is where the story truly ends. Not with a shot, not with a number, but with an idea that refuses to disappear. An idea that refuses to disappear.